So you're joining me on day 21 of my 22-day cycle tour around northern Spain. I'm leaving Puente Viesgo in the Basque, sorry, not in the Basque country, in Cantabria, and heading for Ampuera, also in Cantabria. So this is either my second day cycling in Cantabria, or perhaps my third, because in fact on the first day when I left Bilbao, I'm pretty sure I was crossing over into Cantabria for at least part of that. But we won't argue it one way or the other. At this stage, I'm pretty exhausted. I had a very tough day yesterday with multiple diversions coming through the last bit of Asturias and through the Cantabrian mountains. That ended up being a much longer cycle than I expected on a hot day. And one of the things I noticed as I've been editing this footage together is that I don't have any segments where I talk to the camera in it, either on my phone or indeed on the GoPro mounted on my handlebars. And I think that's because although this is actually a fairly short day, it's only about 63 kilometers, at this stage I was very low on energy and really focused on getting back to the ferry and back to Ireland at that point. So starts out with a fairly flat cycle. There's quite good cycle tracks as we're coming through a more it's not exactly populated, but there's kind of a conurbation runs along this road with a string of towns along it until we're going to turn off. And as you can see, that's mostly this quite nice dual track cycleway. Occasionally turns into a pedestrian way, and then sometimes it's a minor road running out the back. And this coming up to La Penila here, which is, I believe, the site of one of the largest cement factories in Spain. That's it on the distance. On the horizon, it's actually huge. It's quite hard to capture how big it is, but that's also one of the oldest. And this is although this is now quite a rural looking place, this was part of early Spanish industry. One of the next towns we're coming up to, I think it's about 2 towns away, in fact was the first place that there was large scale pre-industrial, semi-industrial production of weapons. So there was the arsenal basically there that smelting the right word, made a lot of the Spanish cannons from the 1700s onwards. But nowadays it's become quieter. It's quite close to Bilbao, it's quite close to Santander, it's also quite close to the other 2 major cities of Cantabria whose names is currently slipping my mind. It may come back, but there's not that much going on otherwise. So there's a fair bit of tourism nowadays. Some of these towns are considered the most scenic places in this area of Spain, or in Spain in general, one of them coming up. However, my day was mostly cycling around the edges of them, although thankfully I am going to get out and away from this motorway soon. It's nice to have those motorway tracks with the kind of safe cycling beside them, but they are a little bit not fun. I guess I could say. I'm much sooner these quiet rural cart roads where you're going through the villages themselves. You've got good views into the fields on either side and then back up into the hills. The last couple of days I've been telling you a bit about the history of the regions of Spain we've been going through from the 700s to the 1930s, and today I thought I'd pop back to another of my favourite things to talk about, which is mythology, and to look at some of the mythological creatures of the Cantabrian mountains. It was quite hard to track this down for other parts of Spain south of the mountains I was cycling through, but Cantabria seems to have a much stronger tradition, which is probably to do with there being less displacement of the population over time, and so more time for legends to build up. Before we get into the mythical creatures of Cantabria, here I almost come across some very non-mythical ones that you wouldn't expect in Cantabria, including lions and elephants. And that's because this hill I'm cycling up now is running towards Cappuccino Natural Park, which is in fact a series of what were once vast open cast iron mines covering 1900 acres, about 750 hectares, that the government of Cantabria restored and turned into something that sounds like a cross between a zoo and a safari park. And so I got up here to this square and saw there were lots of vehicles queuing to go in an entrance. I was like, oh, that kind of looks like something interesting. I wonder what it is. But yeah, so they've got a huge collection of animals and also lots and lots of walkways. So you can drive around. I think there's something like 17 kilometers of driving routes to look at the animals, but there's also multiple walking routes. I think the way it works basically is the old open cast mines left a series of cliffs and deep pits, and basically that means that presumably you can walk around areas where the lines are in a deep pit or behind a cliff and you don't actually get eaten. But I'll leave that as an exercise to check out for yourself if you ever come through the area, and let's go back and start talking about some of these mythical beasts. So we're going to descend here towards the Mira River and the string of towns that runs alongside it, one of those being the town of Leganes. And here's where a mythology starts at a really very recent and in fact kind of recorded creature. So back in the 17th century, in the town of Leganes in Cantabria, there's a young man named Francesco della Vega Caesar, and he's known for his extraordinary swimming skills. He spends hours in the Mira River, his movements are said to be as fluid as a fish. But in 1764, while he's working in Bilbao, he vanishes during a swim in the sea, and despite frantic searches, he's never found, and his family, presuming he's dead, mourning his loss. 5 years later, some fishermen near Cadiz, so a long way away, haul in a strange catch, a creature with human features but covered in scales with webbed hands and feet. He can't speak, but when at a nearby monastery, a friar from Cantabria recognises him and Francisco, he speaks in his native dialect, the friar learns the creature was indeed the missing man. So Francesco is then returned to Leganes by the friar, and the friar says as he gets near the town, instead of leading him, he lets him lead the way, and he finds the way back to his own house, where his family welcome him home, but he's changed. He's quiet, withdrawn, and he's drawn to the water. He spends his days near the river as if longing for the sea, and eventually he disappears again, leaving only behind whispers of his fate. Was he cursed? Did he transform into a fish-like being? Or was he a man caught between two worlds? Some say it was a rare medical condition, others a metaphor for humanity's bond with nature. Whatever the truth, the legend of the fishman, Hombre Pez, endures as a tale of mystery and wonder, and in fact today in Leganes there's a statue by the river of Francesco. The Anhana, they're described as beautiful, delicate, about 15 centimetres tall, with white skin, a sweet voice, and slanted eyes, with black or blue pupils that are as bright as the stars. And nearly transparent wings. So these are little 15 centimetre high flying creatures that I guess are a bit like the sort of fairies you would see in Hollywood films, and not at all like the leprechauns or what are called fairies in Ireland. They wear long jet black or golden braids, multicoloured silk bows, and have a crown of wildflowers on their head. The tradition states that at night during the spring equinox, and we are now approaching that as I'm recording this, they gather in the fells and dance until dawn, holding hands and scattering roses. And if you manage to find a rose that has purple, green, blue or golden petals, you will be happy until the time of your death. So we've now come away from the Mira River Valley. We're climbing into the hills once more for the second of what are going to be 3 climbs during the day. None of these are terribly huge in themselves. You're probably going up to about 250, 300 metres at each peak. But as you'll notice with this one, it's a very rough road surface. So although the climb itself so far wasn't that drastic, the actual quality of the road cycling was pretty tough. And as you'll also see, there's a lot of agricultural machinery. So I was looking at the road ahead. I did a slight diversion here to take me up onto the main road. And then I met one of the other beasts of my trip, the livestock guardian dog. Fortunately, in that case, all they did was a lot of barking as I cycled past. As I've said before, with this type of breed of dog, its main concern seems to be to just keep you moving along and get away from the livestock it's looking after. Those dogs live constantly with the livestock, so they almost identify with them as part of the same family or whatever. They're very different from herding dogs like sheepdogs, basically. They're there to chase off wolves and the like. And tell the odd cyclist to just keep moving and don't be bothering us. So the other feature that's going on today, of course, is that my brakes are wearing out. I'm quite nervous about that. And then I have this descent, which was very steep indeed. The camera never quite captures how steep ascents and descents are, but one of the giveaways is where you see the roads are made of concrete cross strips like this. That's so that in the winter, when it ices up, you've got a little bit more grip. Anyway, that one was bad enough to give me pause to think about what exactly was going to be coming up ahead, and did I actually need to consider the rest of my route, because although I didn't have much the following day, I knew there were going to be hills there as well, and my brakes were making extremely alarming sounds, to put it mildly, and also doing a much worse job of slowing me down. So I stopped at a coffee shop here, had a coffee, and decided that instead of following my original plan, which would have seen me on similar back roads going up over the hills here, I would instead stick on what appeared to be the main road, and I hoped in doing that that I'd avoid ascents, or rather descents, that were quite as steep. And that did work out. But let's have a look at another one of our creatures. So our next beast is the nemesis of those good fairies with encounters, and that's the hmmm. And this is basically a giant, or perhaps more of a troll, which is seen as an embodiment of cruelty and brutality. It loves destruction, it loves tearing up trees. They're somewhere between 3 and 7 meters tall. They've got superhuman strength, and their hands and feet each have 10 digits on them, and they have double rows of teeth. They're very wild, they've got long red hair, lots of facial hair, and both nearly reach to the ground. And the easiest way of killing the male hmmm is to pull out the single white hair that's found in its total mess of a beard. That sounds like it might be a bit of a struggle. The females, however, don't have beards, so I don't know how you're meant to kill those. The strangest thing about them is the reproduction process. They, instead of mating when an old one dies, the rest of them distribute the pieces and bury the corpse under an oak or yew tree, and a new one hatches out from that. So they fight Cantabrian brown bears and bulls, and they always win against those, but the one fear is those good fairies, the Hahanas we already encountered. So watch out for the Ohankus. Our route this morning has largely been taking us through the Transmira region. That's the River Mira it's taking its name from. It's interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that unlike a lot of the rest of the part of northern Spain we've been cycling through, there's actually very little in the way of Roman remains. The Romans don't seem to have been that interested with this particular area. Perhaps there was no gold here, although there was iron. And the other is because it became the home, but it became the place from which an awful lot of the craftsmen, stonemasons in particular, who worked on the castles, palaces and cathedrals across Spain actually came from. So apparently what would happen is they would leave this region for part of the year, I think probably the winter, and then return again once their work contract had been done. And likewise, there was also quite a large wood carving tradition, particularly for the manufacture of wooden altars. So for whatever reasons, a lot of the craftspeople in Spain came from this particular region. And we have one last monster to talk about here, also an interesting one, which is the culebra, a legendary creature. And it's basically a giant winged serpent-stroke dragon, and it inhabits the many caves that are found here and guards treasure, but also often keeps those poor fairies captives. Over time, as it gets older, its scales become impenetrable and it grows bat-like wings. Now, it doesn't really leave its cave, except occasionally when it goes out to eat cattle and people. So a lot of the legends are about those. And there are ways to defeat the creature. You can feed it red hot stones, or you can feed it a loaf of bread that's been filled with pins, and both these can cause its death. And on Midsummer, the night of San Juan, now interestingly that's celebrated in Ireland as well, but it's mostly celebrated in the south and the southeast of Ireland, so particularly around Cork. And there's an obvious seafaring connection, I think, in that context, from that southern Ireland along the coast, along the Bay of Biscay, to the coast of northern Spain. So San Juan seems to be a festival, and it's a similar festival. That's the other thing. In both of the regions, they light fires on top of the hills. So that's probably speaking to a relatively old connection of people flowing from one to the other, which of course is exactly what I'm going to be doing the day after tomorrow when I get on the ferry at Bilbao, and I'll be getting off at Rosslare in Ireland. But anyway, the night of San Juan is a magical time when brave individuals can challenge the Calabria as its spells lose some of their powers on that night. If you check out the video description, you will find a link to the route map I use. You could reproduce this exactly, and you will also find a list of the towns I passed through if you want to find out more information about any of them. And a reminder to follow me on Instagram on eBike Touring Life, where you'll be able to see me post live photographs. I'm arriving at my hotel, €68 a night, and most importantly, it's only 52 kilometers from Bilbao, and will get me to the ferry in time to get on it and get it back to Rosslare the following morning, and the end of what's been a long but very rewarding trip around northern Spain, and a little tiny piece of the Basque Country right at the end. So tune in for the next instalment. I'll have it out in about 3 days' time, and it will be the end of the journey. And if I have time, I'll then put together some accounts of the journey, more general overviews of it. But here's my route. Here's day 21, that little red stretch, and tomorrow, the tiny bit left.